Justice Jackson?
Back to whether the presidency is one of the barred offices, I guess I'm a little surprised at your response to Justice Kagan, because I thought that the history of the 14th Amendment actually provides the reason for why the presidency may not be included. And by that I mean, I didn't see any evidence that the presidency was top of mind for the framers when they were drafting Section 3, because they were actually dealing with a different issue. The pressing concern, at least as I see the historical record, was actually what was going on at lower levels of the government. The possible infiltration and embedding of insurrectionists into the state government apparatus, and the real risk that former Confederates might return to power in the South via state-level elections, either in local offices or as representatives of the states in Congress. And that's a very different lens. If your concern is trying to make sure that these people don't come back through the state apparatus and control the government in that direction, seems to me very different than the worry that an insurrectionist will seize control of the entire national government through the presidency. And so I just am surprised that you would, given the text of the provision and the historical context that seems to demonstrate that their concern or their focus was not about the presidency, I just don't understand why you're giving that argument up.
There is some evidence to suggest that, Justice.
Is there any evidence to suggest that the presidency was what they were focused on?
There is some evidence of that. There were people saying we don't want Jefferson Davis to be elected president, and there was also one of the drafts of Section 3 specifically mentioned the presidency and the vice presidency.
But it wasn't the final.
It wasn't the final.
So
it wasn't. Yes,
right.
I'm sorry. It wasn't the final enactment, but it does show that there was some concern by some people about Confederate insurrectionists ascending to the presidency. And we didn't want to make a law office history type argument where we just look at the historical evidence and pick the evidence that we like and interpret it tendentiously, because the other side can get back with us and throw this countervailing evidence back in our face. So we wanted to focus more on the text of the Constitution, because this was ultimately a compromise provision that was enacted in Section 3.
All right, let me ask you another question about the states, because you have forcefully made an argument about the states not being able to enforce Section 3. So if we agree with you on that, what happens next? I mean, I thought you also wanted us to end the litigation. So is there a possibility that this case continues in federal court if that's our conclusion?
I don't see how it could unless Congress were to enact a statute in response to this court's decision.
So your point is that we would have to say congressional enacting legislation is necessary for either state or federal enforcement?
That's correct.
All right. Final question. The Colorado Supreme Court concluded that the violent attempts of the petitioner's supporters in this case to halt the count on January 6th qualified as an insurrection, as defined by Section 3. And I read your opening brief to accept that those events counted as an insurrection, but then your reply seemed to suggest that they were not. So what is your position as to that?
We never accepted or conceded in our opening brief that this was an insurrection. What we said in our opening brief was President Trump did not engage in any act that can plausibly be characterized as insurrection.
All right, so why would this not be an insurrection? What is your argument that it's not? Your reply brief says that it wasn't because I think you say it did not involve an organized attempt to overthrow the government. So
that's one of many reasons, but for an insurrection there needs to be an organized, concerted effort to overthrow the government of the United States through violence. And this
so the point is that a chaotic effort to overthrow the government is not an insurrection?
No, we didn't concede that it's an effort to overthrow the government either, Justice Jackson. Right? None of these criteria were met. This was a riot. It was not an insurrection. The events were shameful, criminal, violent, all of those things, but it did not qualify as insurrection as that term is used in Section 3.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, counsel.